the intellectual curiosity for federalism, because I think that's an appealing chapter, the intellectual merits behind it. It's an open-minded intellectual exercise here. Where does your curiosity from federalism come from? Is it going back to those early years?
No, I mean, that's a good question. I will tell you academically, as a political scientist, it's simply wrong to govern a multi-confessional society within a centralized system of governance. Think about the history book. I mean, every country is supposed to have a history book.
No.
But the fact is, when you have different communities, you also have different interpretations of history. So, I mean, if you have one single history book that you have to impose on everyone, how can you do that? For instance, Hassan Nasrallah, will you write about him that he's like the hero who liberated the South, or will you write about him that he's an Iranian agent? He's both things to different people. So it's quite wrong to, I would say academically, to imagine that you can run a country that is multi-sectarian, where you have multiple sectarian identities operating within it, from within the confines of a centralized system of government. And also, I mean, again, to go back to your question, where my interest in federalism comes from. I mean, when I ask myself, okay, I'm a comparativist, so this is how I think via comparison. So I ask myself, okay, we're not the only society throughout the world, throughout history, that went through rounds of civil wars and ethnic conflict. What did other societies that also suffered from ethnic conflict and identity-related frictions, and somehow found a way to basically become more stable? What did they do? What was that way?
Yeah.
And over and over and over again, that's some kind of federalism.
Yeah.
I say some kind of federalism because there are multiple. Federalism is actually federalisms, right?
Yeah.
But always some kind of federalism. So how did, the Catholic and the Protestants and the Germanophones and the Francophones in Switzerland, how did they overcome centuries of internal war? Federalism.
Yeah.
How did the Walloon and the Flamand overcome deep sectarian hatreds?
They haven't.
They haven't, true. Actually, that's true. But then, so how do they live with that without falling?
And they're not living. They have more paralysis than we do. Right?
Well, how do they go through that without falling into political violence? What kind of regime allow groups that fundamentally are very different and do not like one another, yet to coexist peacefully without falling into what political science calls the civil war trap, on and on and on. So every time it's federalism. So hence my interest in federalism from a comparative perspective. I don't believe that it's a good idea to run a country that is, when you have multiple peoples within it, to run it from a centralized perspective. It has to be some kind of federalism plus neutrality, because the different peoples of that country cannot agree on who's a friend and who's an enemy when it comes to external powers. Again, go back to Switzerland. Had they, say, intervened on the side of France during the First World War, well, the German part of Switzerland would have found an issue with that. Had they intervened on the side of Germany, the French part would have found issue with that, and then that would have led to a civil war. I think we are on a very similar situation here. If we intervene when we intervene on the side of the Palestinians, the Christian side of the population has an issue with that. Now that we are too close to Iran, the Sunni and the Christian and the Druze part of the population have an issue with that. So when I think about all these issues from a comparative perspective, I keep thinking that the only formula, if there is a way, and I'm saying if there is a way, I'm not certain there is a way for Lebanon to be stable. Maybe there's no way for Lebanon to be stable, and maybe with it we should think some kind of separation. I don't find that a horrible idea to think about. I believe people in Greek Cyprus live far better than we do here. So separation or the end of a country, in my mind, it's not a tragedy, because individuals matter. Ideologies of nationalism do not matter. Countries do not matter. What matters is the individual. If for the future of Lebanese people, Lebanese individual living here, it's better to go separate ways, it doesn't. I don't find that a bad idea. That being said, Before going that far, from a comparative perspective, as a comparativist, as a political scientist, I can tell you that typically societies that suffered from decades of civil war, in some cases centuries of civil war, and then eventually grew out of that and became stable, that happened via some kind of neutrality and some kind of federalism.
So before we go to you, Nadim, just is it through the PhD process that this idea was convincing, or does it go back to the earlier notions of
no, I see. Well, I mean, obviously when I went to the States I was 30, so I was already reading about politics before going to the States. So no, that's actually earlier than that. But then let me tell you that nothing I read during the 6 years in graduate school convinced me that I was wrong about that specific point. If anything, everything I read, all the people I've spoken to, and obviously I've spoken to a lot of people working on contentious politics, civil wars, ethnic conflict, what have you, actually suggested that, yes, I mean, you have to accept that clearly identities are socially constructed, but once they are constructed, you cannot unconstruct them at will. Identities are less flexible than many of us think they are. The Druze identity, the Maronite identity, the Sunni identity, the Shia, these are not misunderstandings. These are not things that we will wake up one beautiful morning and discover that they will disappear. They will not disappear, and they are legitimate, and they are here to stay. And so the question is, how do you manage that diversity? What do you do for people with different identities, different political choices, different feelings about things, and yet sharing the same land, and in our case, a very narrow land, and yet to live together. And academically, I can tell you that's some kind of federalism. And for the life of me, I cannot understand why this idea, which in my mind is on the one hand empirically proven, and more importantly, it's liberal, because federalism is basically vivre et laisser vivre. Federalism basically means if a majority in Saida does not want people to allow women to, go to, swim in the, and if this is what the majority wants, who am I, Hicham Bou Nassif, to say you have no right? And if a majority wants something different, then that's fine. Point is, every culture respects the other culture, provided its own choices are also respected. And that I don't see that happening within a centralized system of government. I see that happening easier within some kind of decentralization, and federalism is the ultimate decentralization.
So I'll leave the last question, which we're approaching, to the issue that you hinted at, which I share, is that there could be a fait accompli, which is eventual separation anyway. Whether federalism works or not, that could be where things are moving gradually. I'm curious about, and I watched on MTV and I liked that split screen. I think it was a highway. I don't remember where exactly, where the somebody next to you pointed and said, "That's current Lebanon, and that's federal Lebanon. There's no difference." In other words, these cars are moving, people are moving back and forth. I appreciate that. It's kind of demystifying and also saying that, look, not much changes on the ground in terms of your ability to get places. It's more about autonomy and expression. And I guess born from what you saw as growing up and fast forwarding until today, the comfort of a community that you see which is on the decline and needs to be saved. I think that's the spirit of it.
But I mean, of course, yes, you're right. But even if it weren't on the decline,
it's a solution anyway.
It's a solution anyway. Right. Even if we were talking in the 1950s, when demographically nobody was on the decline, right? You do not run a country that way, like Lebanon, within a centralized system of government, and you do not run a country like Lebanon without neutrality, because we do not agree on the basic choices of foreign policy. This is, by the way, why I disagree strongly with Taif, because Taif not only does not contain neutrality, in fact, the philosophy of Taif makes neutrality impossible. Because Taif says very clearly that we are an Arab country and we have to abide by whatever the Arabs decide to do, what have you, which basically means if the Arabs want to fight Iran, we'll have to fight Iran with the Arabs. So if the Arabs want to fight Israel, we are with the Arabs. Also, Taif, by the way, says we also should have علاقات مميزة مع الشقيقة سوريا. So that means not only we cannot be neutral if there are quarrels between Arabs and non-Arabs, if there is a quarrel between the Syrian state and another state, from within the confines of Ta'if, we cannot be neutral because according to the alaqat mumayyaza, we have to be with our dear brotherly Syria.
Let me push just quickly on 2 points.
Yeah.
If federalism is the viable solution, which you described in terms of other countries' experiences, could you suggest why it's not something that took at least the mainstream attention before? If you go, sorry.
It's been around for a long time, but I think.
So sorry to interrupt. Is it more an expression because of the anxiety that it's heightened now because of that, rather than going back to the 50s and 60s, for example?
No, I mean, listen, I was a Federalist in the 1990s when the Syrians were there. But I mean, in the 1990s, you couldn't go on TV and say, I am for federalism. So, so federalism has always been there. But, if you're proposing an alternative for a system, and the system seems to be working, you will not get a lot of people. You'll not get a lot of attention.
Yeah.
When there's clearly a crisis in the system and the system has collapsed, and you're suggesting an alternative, then actually more people want to hear about what you have to say because people understand that the system is not working. So the time for federalism has come in terms of grabbing the attention of people. But federalism itself has been there for a long time.
If I could describe your role the way I see it, it's being the narrator behind that cause on television, oral expression, sometimes in between shows on MTV. That's how I got to know you. So I think you are filling that role effectively. Another quick point: if federalism were to happen, does that require a security pact with Hezbollah?
Well, see, that's another good question. So let me tell you, I think I just said that federalism is federalisms. Now, we can think of one kind of, just as we say la markaziyya and la markaziyya muwassa. We can have federalism, federaliyya and federaliyya muwassa. Federaliyya muwassa so much that it becomes close to some kind of confederation. And if we end up with something close to a confederation,
for example,
then we can say, okay, if the Shia majority regions vote democratically to keep Hezbollah, that is fine. It's their sovereign choice. However, if people in Perry vote democratically not to allow Hezbollah, that's also fine then. So essentially, you end up with some kind of pact where you have, if there's one component of the population, one region of the population has decided freely to allow Hezbollah to retain its arms, that's their choice. If Tripoli, by contrast, decided not to allow Hezbollah that's also their choice, and we have to abide by the rules of the game. So from that perspective, yes, federalism/confederalism can provide some kind of, solution for the problem. Whereas I don't see that happening within the confines of a centralized state.
As far as you know, maybe it's premature to ask this. Can you think of how Hezbollah would react to this kind of process?
Oh, I mean, that does not require a lot of imagination. Hezbollah, who controls Hezbollah now is thinking, what mine is mine and what yours is mine as well. So almost by definition, Hezbollah is going to reject any kind of
system change
Hezbollah currently is a great force for the status quo. Federalism is an anti-status quo idea. So almost by definition, you have a clash between, the federalist logic and the Hezbollah logic. The Khomeinis now, or the Hezbollahis now, are the great, the French used to call them the Jacobins. The Jacobins of the French Revolution were the great centralizers, whereas the Girondins wanted some kind of decentralization in France. Hezbollah now is
that kind of
the Jacobins, the great centralizers, because they control the centralized system.
So how do you manage? I mean, I know it hasn't happened. So that's why it's hypothetical. How do you manage a security problem like that with something like federalism or confederalism? Does it require? And I'm not suggesting this is the way forward. I'm just thinking through it. Does that require a competitive security arrangement, which could look more like the 1980s? It wasn't federalism, obviously, but you had multiple security forces competing.
See, I don't like comparisons with the 1980s because that was a civil war. And all I'm thinking is, what can we do to avoid going back to the civil war? But I am thinking about some kind of, you lived in the States. Every state has its own national guard, right? You have the national guards in California. You have the national guard in different states. So you can, for instance, imagine Hezbollah becoming some kind of national guard for the South, if the majority of the people of the South want that. Whereas you can imagine people in Tripoli voting not to have a national guard, or voting to have a national guard that would be recruiting its members from the people of Tripoli.
So it's more Hezbollah, the political party, not Hezbollah, the militia. That's, in other words, so long as there's this machine, any idea is going to be cut short. But I think the way you're describing the Hezbollah National Guard, it sounds like a disarmed Hezbollah.
No, not a disarmed Hezbollah, but Hezbollah that is confined from a military perspective and a security perspective to the part of the country that wants Hezbollah. Whereas now we can have Hezbollah. I mean, maybe here there's a Hezbollah. I mean, who knows, right? So this is what I don't want to see happening. If the majority of the Shia democratically want to have Hezbollah military presence in the south, I abide by that.
I see. So it's an acceptance of that?
Yes.
Okay.
Provided they also accept that if the majority of people in Tripoli, if the majority of people in Ashrafiyya, if they do not want that, then, you cannot have Hezbollah security presence and military presence there.
It is the most interesting academic exercise happening right now in Lebanon. The appeal to system change and the ideas that are emerging. So I appreciate you taking me further into the future. Before we wrap it up, though, Nadim, this debate is born from 2 episodes, really. And I think it stems from your divergence from that option moving forward.
It was only 30 seconds,
maybe something less than a minute for sure. It was less than a minute. Could you elaborate on what Hicham just said, and if there's anything you see different?
Yeah, I see it completely different because, Hicham is lucky that everything he's read has proved him right. And the more I read, the more I think I'm wrong. I call myself a repentant economist, and I'm trying to unlearn everything I've done. So we're in a different phase of, I'm re-examining.
Did I say everything I read proved me right?
Yeah, you said that your thesis, through 8 years of studying, has been reinforced, and it's been
Azizi, I said everything I read about the possibility of federalism finding a solution for a country like us proved me right about this specific point. But I didn't say that everything I read about anything proved me right about anything. That would be completely different.
But you see, I don't see the mechanism. And no, I'm not a constitutional lawyer. If anything, I've participated in lots of international negotiations, and if you're going to negotiate a treaty, you have to choose the time, and your negotiation is with a party that does not want to negotiate and that has the whole cake. So I think there is a conversation to be had whether such a negotiation has any chance of success from a practical and realist level, because Hezbollah now basically doesn't have to do anything. All they have to do is block, and the country is disintegrating, and they're taking over gradually. And in 1 week, in 3 weeks, we won't have a central bank. In a couple of months, we won't have an army chief. And then we won't have a judiciary, and we don't have a constitutional council. The country disintegrate while they're watching, without anything. So there's no incentive for them to. So from a purely practical negotiation, I don't see it working.
But who said
from an ideological perspective, I am far more extreme than you are. Because I reject them completely, not on behalf of Christians or Muslims or Sunnis or Druze, even on behalf of Shia. And I think the Shias are the ones who will reject them eventually the most, and they are the ones who are suffering most from them. And the future of all of us depends on better actors coming together. Yani we don't have to choose between. I don't want to name names. We don't have to choose between bad actors and take. There is a better way of existing. Even in Europe, there is. In Europe now, you have bad actors like Putin, like some like Orban or whatever. I'm less compromising with bad actors and I'm less acceptant. You're the nice guy. I'm not. If you want.
Nadim, first of all, I don't see as anything I said as extreme.
But you are described as extreme. I'm more extreme than you are.
I like to think of myself as a realist who's looking at facts. I understand history is politics. I mean, human nature is imperfect. Society is imperfect. So there's no such a thing as a perfect solution. I'm trying to come up with an imperfect solution for an absolutely tragic situation. And by the way, something I note about this imperfect solution of mine, how easy it is to criticize it, and most of the time people have no plan B. Okay, so let us say let's say that's not the solution. So what is actually the solution? Most of the people who are spending days on end criticizing federalism do not have a better idea, and I think that speaks a lot to the benefits of federalism. But that's not the point. My point is, when you're saying eventually they will reject Hezbollah, I don't see the Alawi Syrians rejecting.
I see them very much doing
the Assad regime. They had a chance in 2011, and in fact, the majority of them. But I think you know that I study civil-military relations.
Yeah.
I spent years on end studying the Syrian military. I went to Turkey and for 4 months, and I interviewed hundreds of Sunni officers who defected. They were all Sunnis. I didn't see one single other officer who defected from the Assad regime. And I know that Alawi officers, simply put, did not defect, and the majority of them, the extreme majority, overwhelming majority of the community remained loyal to the Assad regime. I don't see the Shia in Iraq defecting from the Hashd.
They are. You have the Tishreen movement in Iraq.
Aziz, let me.
I'm not very serious.
I'm not saying any community. There's no community in the world. I agree with that. That is, 100% a unified actor. But there are clear majorities among the Alawis of Syria, for instance, that remain loyal to this day to the Assad regime, despite the horrors that regime perpetrated in Syria. This is why I have a problem with what you're saying from methodological perspective, because I take facts, brutal as they are, ugly as they are, and I try to build my political analysis on these facts. Whereas what you're doing, you are so morally repulsed, and it's morally repulsive. I agree with that. But you are so morally repulsed by the fact that a majority of Alawis are loyal to Assad, or a majority of Shia are loyal to Hezbollah, that you seem to deny that fact and just project a beautiful future in which the Shia will eventually gloriously rebel against Hezbollah. I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening in Syria, and this is where we are.
What to do about it? You're right. Yeah. But you see, because I don't see it as essentialist that people who are Alawis are born pro-Assad.
Yeah.
I see that a regime like Assad and a party like Hezbollah has methods of establishing hegemony through assassination, through dependency, through blackmail, through persecution, through war, provoking war. I mean, the 2006 war was deliberately provoked by Hezbollah to reestablish its hegemony over its own community and and its credentials as a. So these are methods that Assad uses, that the Hashd use, that Hezbollah uses, that bad actors use, that Putin uses, and other. So I can see through it that that certain bad actors have methods of control over a society, which does not necessarily mean that the society is in support of it. Sometimes they have no choice in the matter. In the same way as a drug cartel in Mexico or in Colombia controls a society and corrupts the army and the judiciary, and El Chapo Guzman is in jail now, but his the way they established control was by framing, if you don't collaborate, they come and tell you, Senor, your niece Conchita, she's beautiful, studying law in university. You understand that they are threatening you, and you comply. And then they give you $1,000 in an envelope. You become part of the system, and if you don't, they kill you. And this is how bad actors establish a hegemony. It doesn't mean that there is support. It means that you want to liberate them from that bad actor as much as you want to liberate yourself. Especially that even if I don't care, let them go to hell and live with Hezbollah as much. I don't think that it is viable to have an order where such an actor still prevails, even in a small part of, because they have means of dragging everybody into the same. And they have, مش بس they have means to do it. They have done it. The country has collapsed through constant battering, constant assassinations, constant state of war, constant smuggling. I think we're all victims of that. So that's the difference, I think. That's one of the issues. And I don't think, I'm not anti-federalism, I'm for decentralization, and I'm for a very weak state and all this. Yeah. But I don't think it would resolve it to accept that bad actor by separating from it.
Very briefly.
Sure, of course. Yeah.
So the Hashd al-Shabi is a bad actor, what you're calling a bad actor in Iraq. I think Kurdistan and the Kurds are doing a good job at, to a large extent, protecting themselves from that bad actor. Mm-hmm. Assad regime is a bad actor in Syria. Mm-hmm. And I think the Kurds of Syria, feeble as they are, imperfect as they are, but they have carved a place for themselves in Syria, that they are relatively within, again, the imperfection of the situation, protecting themselves from the Assad regime. I believe some kind of confederal arrangement will give us also a kind of safe haven in this country, whereby just like the Kurds of Iraq that are relatively safe from the Hashd al-Shabi, we too can be safe from Hezbollah via the logic that I am suggesting. I don't see a solution. I don't see that happening within the confines of the logic that you are suggesting, Nadim.